Welcome to Flipping the Table. I'm Matthew Marsom, CEO of Goodwin Strategies and policy advisor to Roots of Change. Food as medicine is gaining momentum across the country, grounded in a simple but powerful idea. Healthy food can help prevent, manage, and even reverse chronic disease. But this movement is about more than treating illness. It's about changing the conditions that shape health, including nutrition security, access to care, soil health, food quality, and the strength of local and regional food systems. In this episode, we explore what that vision looks like in practice with two leaders helping shape the future of food as medicine. Dr. Chen is the founding director and chief medical officer of Alameda County's nationally recognized Recipe for Health program, which prescribes regenerative and organic produce alongside health coaching to address chronic disease and nutrition insecurity. We're also joined by Erin Martin, president of the Tulsa Urban Ag Coalition, director of Oklahoma's Fresh RX program, and co-lead of Oklahoma's Food as Medicine Policy Coalition. Erin brings a unique perspective on the connections between regenerative agriculture, healthy aging, chronic disease prevention, and community resilience. I was pleased to co-host this conversation with Coco Sanabria, a member of the Roots of Change core team and co-author of a new ROC white paper, Bridging Regional Food Systems and Healthcare, that explores the synergies between food as medicine and the needed investments to enhance nutrition security and build community resilience. Together, Erin, Stephen, Coco, and I discussed the evolution of food as medicine, the importance of connecting healthcare with local and regional food systems, and the role that regenerative agriculture can play in improving both human and environmental health. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. We're together today because we all have an interest in food as medicine and recognize that expanding healthy food access for individuals must come from multiple points of intervention. So I'm very excited to have you both, Erin, Martin, and Stephen Chen, here with me today. Matthew and I just recently co-authored a white paper with Michael Dimmick and Betty Sun with the Center of Wellness and Nutrition, part of PHI. It's called Bridging Regional Food Systems and Healthcare. And so I feel like that brings together a lot of the themes that we're all working on, and I'm excited to hear from you all. Each of you, of course, is doing fantastic work with Recipe for Health and Fresh RX Oklahoma. And so I'd really like to get started with kind of the beginning of your stories, and interests specifically with food as medicine, and why you decided that that was the intervention strategy to invest in. Can you get us started, Erin?
Sure. Great to be here with you all. My journey started when I was 15 years old. I was working in a retirement community for 55 and older, and I fell in love with 135 older adults. And I saw a lot as a young person. And I really fell in love with the wisdom of older people. And I certainly knew who was diabetic because had to serve them sugar-free desserts, but I really saw a lot and felt really deeply in love and connected with older people and was able to learn a lot. But it was my first lens and my first view into the world of healthcare and long-term care. And by the time I was in my mid 20s, I had worked in all levels of long-term care, including assisted living, hospice care, and affordable housing for seniors. And I was looking to get a higher education, and my father said, "Why don't you do gerontology? You love older people." And I said, "That's not a degree. I don't know what you're talking about." And of course, 10 miles from my apartment at the time was the number one school of gerontology in the world at USC Leonard Davis School of Gerontology, and learned a lot at that school while simultaneously serving a team who also served 700 low-income seniors in Southern California. And I saw and learned and was trained in the systems of aging by lawyers in Los Angeles, a great nonprofit called Justice in Aging. And I learned about how to help older adults navigate Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and end of life issues. And I really had a pulse on what people had access to and what they didn't have access to. And I saw people on 15 to 32 prescription drugs at a time. But I was learning in my program at USC about the myths of aging and what actually creates quality of life and longevity. And I started studying how aging was happening around the world. And I saw some major discrepancies between how people aged in other countries and how they were aging in the United States in particular. And my final course at the gerontology school was actually abroad in Italy, and I was able to really understand the cultural differences and the impacts on aging. And that is when I really started connecting food as a huge ripple effect. Everywhere I looked, there were gaps and problems and cracks that people were falling into. And I could certainly point my passion and my love for older people anywhere and fix problems, but I wanted somewhere that I could focus that would have the largest ripple effect. And shortly after that, I randomly was interested in a soil advocacy course at a nonprofit called Kiss the Ground in Los Angeles, not knowing it had anything to do with food or my work, and very quickly understood soil science, the depletion of nutrients caused by conventional agriculture, but regenerative agriculture's ability to not only restore the nutrients much quicker than we destroyed them, but actually increase nutrients through proper holistic management of the soil and livestock and plants. And that gave me hope for the first time in a long time. And I could never again disconnect soil from food to health and aging and longevity for people.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great tie into the idea of really upstreaming health and upstreaming impact and broadening it as such. Stephen, what about you? What really made you realize that food as medicine was the intervention strategy you wanted to invest in?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. My journey starts with my grandfather. So just like Erin started with an elderly community, my grandfather was a farmer in Taiwan, third grade educated, illiterate, but was the wisest man in the village. And his son, my father, went into engineering to come to the country when this country allowed Asians back into the country after 1965. And then I was born here, right? So I come from a lineage and a history connected to land and farming. But in terms of this question of why food is medicine, coming from that lineage, that history, I've always known there are different ways of doing things, right? You grow up in a country with a particular way, but you also have other experiences that create opportunities to think through different ways of doing things. And that was my journey into medicine. My grandfather would, if I had, different skin issues as a kid or whatever health issues, they would use what at the time was alternative, but now is much more integrative medicine approaches to enter, balms and things that he made. And so it was like, oh, okay, well, there are different ways of doing things. So it starts from a place of knowing there are different ways of doing things. And then going through med school and realizing, well, we're trained in a particular way, but there's some large gaps. And so it's been a series of hooks that has led me to food as medicine. I didn't start thinking I'm going to do food as medicine. It was, I'm going to do medicine in underserved communities, taking care of communities of need, and blend in and bring in whatever practices will be useful. And so the story kind of begins with my family, goes through med school without a full awareness of all of the stuff that I'm doing now. It kind of organically came into place. When I was running a medical center, one of our health centers in our county, I had the opportunity to build a brand new clinic. I insisted on having a teaching kitchen and group space, and we started building programming. And then it just happened that we partnered with a farm that was hyper local and that was doing regenerative farming, right? So it's like, okay, they want to provide food, we want to prescribe it. Great possibility. And so we just began to do that work and piloting our food as medicine work in what we call FQHC, so federally qualified health centers, these safety net systems across the nation, 1,400 of these centers, 19,000 sites. And we were doing it in Alameda County. And so that caught wind, I suppose,
Yeah.
to our supervisor. And our supervisor, the late Wilma Chan, she called me into a meeting at the supervisors one day after we'd been innovating and creating this model in 2016. And so I shared with them our model. And I said, hey, we're doing food as medicine. And this is what it is. This is the model. This is how we're improving health for our patients. This is how we're addressing food insecurity and social determinants of health. And I kind of threw down the gauntlet, right? My closing statements were, imagine the day when food is medicine, these interventions of regenerative produce, health coaching is covered as a prescription, just like when you get a prescription for your blood pressure or your antibiotics. And then I kind of might just said, okay, that's the challenge. And so she, as a leader, was very interested in replicating and expanding it. And so a few years later, she recruited me over to the county to work at the county level. And she said, I want you to, because I was asking, why would I want to leave the health system that I built, this brand new clinic? We're doing all this great work. And she said, I want you to help build this model across Alameda County. I want you to work with me at the state to work on policy. And so I testified with her. We wrote policy together. And I want you to take it as far as possible into the nation. And again, this is just food as medicine, right? And we started regeneratively with the sourcing. And I would just say, just in terms of the intervention to invest in, this has taken me over a period of doing this work on the ground to see all of the connections. Because I think most of us are pretty siloed, right? I'm in healthcare. Healthcare people don't often know about food, the sourcing. And there's this whole world of food systems and food advocates, and they don't know anything usually about healthcare, right? It's often very separate. And then there's the whole environmental work in planetary health that kind of tries to touch into it. The more and more I do this work, working with Erin, working with other people, it's become very clear the silos have to be shattered. And when we shatter those silos and create cross-cutting systems, we can see that food as medicine programs, and this is the why it's so convincing for me, food as medicine programs that source regeneratively, organically, locally, from and include an equity perspective of bringing in as many BIPOC farmers as possible. When you line it up that way, you bring all the silos together. Healthcare is now working with food systems, is working with ag as well. And so you get, the health multiplier effect. And this is why it's so powerful. It's the intervention. This health multiplier effect allows us to not only help human health, right, but also economic health and ecological health. So the three H's, H cubed, and E is equity. But the human health piece, it became clear when I was seeing patients, like, oh, wow, food can be a very important determinant of health to help my patients. But now imagine rippling out to the farm worker. They're getting exposed to less pesticides. And now the communities with less pesticide drift. That's on human health. The economic health, all the opportunities for farmers to get revitalized with a market that's going to pay for their food, with healthcare paying for their food. The health system benefits for economic health of savings, hospitalizations, and ER visits. And then the ecological health, just to bring it back to what Erin was saying, soil health is critical and foundational public health. Climate health, with all the greenhouse gas emissions that can be shifted and the carbon cycling that can happen when you grow your food this way. And then certainly water health, right, with improving our waterways. So for all of these reasons, this is more powerful than just a pill. It's more powerful because it can have a multiplier effect across health, economics, and in the ecological health of our planet. So that's why it is, I think, an important intervention, because food touches all of us. We all have to eat it, and there's a whole kinetic chain of silos that need to be broken and re-knit together. And that's why your white paper is super interesting, because I think you are beginning to articulate that.
Yeah, and you tee me up perfectly because this is some of the work that Roots of Change does, and I would say a lot of it to the DNA of who we are as an organization really speaks to cross collaboration, cross sector collaboration. Of course, we are focused in food system transformation, but it is across all these actors that you mentioned, whether it's with health or human safety and focusing on growers as well as like the middle of the supply chain, as well as the buyers on an individual level and an institutional level. And yeah, our white paper really is seeking or sought to demonstrate how both healthcare and food as medicine initiatives specifically, as well as emergency feeding programs that might pop up in moments of disruption, must be linked to local agricultural interests and regenerative growing practices. And I think you both beautifully spoke to why some of those elements really come together and are pieced together. Of course, us coming from a focus of food systems, have an interest in healthier food procurement for people, healthier food procurement from a local perspective for local economies, which also, as you spoke to, Stephen, really integrates and invests then the health into the system, both physical health and economic health. Um, and so ultimately, I mean, this white paper speaks to how we really must strengthen the networks of community-based organizations that we work with on a day-to-day basis and on an emergency basis, how we must integrate local food into healthcare, as we're all going to be speaking about today, and how we have to diversify the food infrastructure, though, that allows us to be able to do those pieces. And so Matthew and I were discussing some of these elements as we're going through the process of writing this paper of how do we really pull each of these pieces together and who can we lean on to really understand what the story and framing is of such a huge question and a huge conversation and ultimately pieces that fit within different systems. But I was excited about it. I'm excited to continue our conversation today.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Coco. I mean, in our experience, particularly during the pandemic, where Roots of Change was instrumental in working in LA County to deliver support to families that were food insecure for a variety of reasons, weren't able to access nutritious food. And then through our work in Stockton on the Food as Medicine initiative, what became very clear, though, was the critical gaps that existed, even within state of California, where we are close to some of the most incredible produce, that we were still so dependent on some of those supply chain and industrial food systems, and that it wasn't possible to source food either regenerative or from local and regional food systems. And it was necessary for us to take a step back and through the white paper have identified the recommendations, both so that we can be building the infrastructure needed, the resiliency within community-based organizations to respond. They're so often called upon, those trusted messengers in times of need, but also ensuring that we're building the infrastructure and support needed to both source regeneratively, but also putting in place the necessary infrastructure for the long term so that communities can respond when the next pandemic happens, or for those slow moving, as we see them anyway, roots of change, those slow moving impacts, whether it's the chronic disease impact or other issues as well. And that's what we've tried to do by putting forward this white paper and be part of this conversation that's happening locally at the state and of course at the national level. And that's why for Food as Medicine, we see the need for our voice as well to be advocating to ensure that we're doing preference and sourcing for regenerative and local and regional food systems, which opens up the next question, Coco. So
Yes.
for Erin and Stephen.
No, that's perfect. I mean, clearly you're both champions of regenerative and local sourcing as integral to food as medicine approaches. But what risks do you see if food as medicine scales nationally without that clear attention to sourcing and without a clear attention to regional food system development? Erin, I'll go to you.
I think we have to anchor this deeper, that people don't understand the complexity and link to all of these problems. Like Dr. Chen described so well, we're solving very complex issues that go across multiple disciplines, and they are actually inextricably linked. They are siloed in reality, but they're not actually siloed when it comes to solving this problem. And I think people really don't understand why this is critical to prioritize. If it doesn't get prioritized, it's not going to happen because our systems are built how they've been incentivized to be built. And we built things for scale, but we've lost things. And it doesn't mean that we can't scale local or regeneratively grown food. We absolutely can. And yields are usually comparable, if not more, actually, from some of the huge studies being done on regenerative agriculture. So there's a lot of myths to debunk here. And food as medicine has a huge opportunity to actually attack this multi-layered problem, complex problem,
Mm,
and solve it. if it's done intentionally with integrity. If we focus on scale for scale's sake, we're going to lose the multiplier effect that Dr. Chen is describing. We have built systems that are extractive to communities. It is the reason why rural communities and all communities are extremely sick. They're sick economically, culturally, health wise. We're losing 28,000 farms a year are filing bankruptcy.
Mhm.
Public health is farmers and soil health and quality of food. And so when we don't prioritize and take the opportunity, and to me, it's a responsibility and a duty as food as medicine implementers to understand and to not be stimulating a system that got us sick in the first place, that we need to be stimulating a system that will make our communities whole again. And if we miss this mark, we lose this giant ripple effect opportunity. And it's because of work and groundwork that Dr. Chen has laid and several others, and our ability to echo each other, that this ship is sailing. And it's not gonna be perfect. And of course, there's always gonna be bigger agriculture, but we need to be able to start carving out priorities for local and organic regenerative sourcing. Just like Dr. Stephen Chen is saying, our communities are exposed to a ton of chemicals and it's everywhere. It's even on organic food because of the overspray and the drift. It's even in the rain, right? And I have endless examples of that with farmers that I know. And so this affects food as medicine, may be certain programming for certain populations, and it's going to grow and grow, but it actually affects the entire nation and the health of our nation. And rural America in particular needs to be restored. And food as medicine is a major vein and opportunity to resurrect local economy and health. And we should not miss the mark on this.
Hmm. What risks do you see, Stephen? Echoing that at
Yeah,
all?
there's a lot of echoes. I mean, I do think Erin was spot on so many pieces. The risk is that we reproduce the same system that is leading us to ill health in this nation. The risk is that the way that capital and our economies work, that scaling is defined as, hey, let's just get any kind of food because it's better than a Twinkie to everybody. And the risk is what has happened in the school meals programs, where we have access for children, but we have to ask what kind of access are they given to when we price things out. And so when I look at what my kids get, I have twins and they're 11, about to be 12. If I had a picture, you would see like a school breakfast would be a lot of cereal, Frosted Flakes,
Yeah.
muffins, tricks, these things. And that is food. It will address hunger, but it is not nutrition. In fact,
Mhm.
it's the opposite. And it is a metabolic bomb about to happen that will lead to more fatty liver, prediabetes, all the things that we take care of in clinic. So we have a major inflection point to really think about. And as food as medicine gets prominence, and the people who have been doing the work on the ground have kind of helped to bring that prominence, looking at Erin's work, et cetera. The question is, how do we create the guardrails so that we can use this moment to re-engineer the food system, the health system, and re-knit it together? Because
Mm.
and the food is the nexus point to do so for planetary health, for human health, for all of these pieces. And the risk is that we lose this opportunity and we create a new market that reinforces the status quo and drives us even further away from health for the planet as well as for people. And we know that this impacts communities who are either rural communities, inner city communities, they're all tied together. The
Mhm.
folks who are less resourced often bear the brunt. And we know that through climate change as well as through disruption, any type of disruption, the disruptions you all describe in your white paper, that it lands heavily on communities that are not always as well resourced. So I think that is the risk. And I would just challenge the notion of scale. Like let's unpack, let's actually think through what do we mean by scale? And I remember saying this at the first White House or at the first HHS conference on food as medicine. And I was saying, let's think about scale that's equitable. Let's think about scale that's local, and let's think about scale that's layered, so that it allows for a prioritization, like you said, Matthew, to hyper local to local, but regional and national and international. We allow for that scale, but we're trying to prioritize to build the health multiplier effect, to create resilience, but it needs intentionality, like Erin said, because without that North Star, without intentionality built in, then the typical approach will be scale, as fast as you can with a central unit that's extracting, and the profit margins and all that just become the drivers as opposed to the opportunity to really help to multiply health on all these fronts.
Yeah.
Stephen, if I may, Coco, Stephen and Erin have both, both of you are such ambassadors for what we firmly believe at Roots of Change, which is that food is one of the deepest forms of interdependence in American life. When you spoke just then in your last comment, Stephen, about the impact on rural and urban, and yet today we see, of course, the disconnect or the division that so many like to exploit. But the
That's right.
reality is that food is that connector. It connects our health, our land, our economies, our communities, our future. And yet, too often, food's just treated as a commodity, where it's one of the most powerful places to also rebuild trust and common purpose. And Roots of Change, both in our work with this white paper, also our Vote for Your Food campaign, we're trying to use that opportunity for initiatives like Food as Medicine by connecting to both social and health impacts, environmental impacts, the benefits for our communities, rural economic development, and culture to support urban and rural communities is such an opportunity. And I think it's exemplified by what both you are doing in your work through Food as Medicine.
Matthew, I just going to jump in because you reminded me by using the C word, commodity. What's at risk? What's the scale of what we're talking about and why this is the intervention?
Mm.
I always ask the audiences that I speak to, and I ask the question, how much do we in the US spend on health care per year? And people say different things, 100 billion, blah,
Billions.
blah. It's 5 trillion, 4.9
Mm.
trillion.
More than we spend on the military.
It's a T, right? And that's healthcare. We're just spending regardless.
Mhm.
All of the hospitalizations, ER, GLP-1s, et cetera, we just spend. No questions. We're not asking to prove double-blinded randomized controlled trials on everything. We say, hey, if there's a health benefit, let's just spend. How much, and you know this answer probably, Matthew, how much do we spend on the farm bill? How much does the farm bill give us every year? It's a 5-year plan, but it's every year. If we actually broke it down by year, how much is that? And the farm bill is what undergirds our ag and food policy, right? All this commodity, all the crop insurance, et cetera. How much? What's that number?
It's a lot smaller than healthcare,
It's
but it's substantial, and we're subsidizing our own demise through the farm bill.
right, and it's so powerful. And everyone, it's a political hot, it's a political hot potato. It's
Yeah.
86 billion B, so it's a lot of money. But let's right size this. It's only 2% of healthcare. So healthcare is a sleeping giant that needs to be awakened. And I say this to my colleagues because we got minimal training on this, to think systems wise, to think beyond our patient. Imagine healthcare spending some small slice of that 5 trillion to prioritize the food we want, so-called specialty crops across the nation. Invest in that to take care of our communities. That could be transformational. That's what's at stake. We don't want that to just go into the typical flows of capital that are extractive, that are, focused on a few companies. We need to get this and spread that wealth because it has that level of financial funding possibility to happen. So,
Yeah, let me just add too, I think to just really hit it home for people, our food is predominantly grown in the top 6 inches of our soil. And conventional agriculture is destroying topsoil. We're losing it at an extraordinary rate. We lose a like pickup truck full of topsoil per acre every single year, which means our ability to grow food is decreasing and our population is ever growing. So, if we continue to stimulate agricultural systems that are causing this loss of topsoil, our ability to grow food it will continue to diminish. And so, in my opinion, without investing in organic regenerative agriculture and prioritizing it, and God forbid, uh, reprioritizing lots of subsidies through the Farm Bill that are not going to food at all,
Hmm.
if we don't do this, we won't have a food as medicine industry at all.
Well, let's dig deeper on what action then do we need to see. And Erin, you've been deeply involved in advancing a bill that was recently introduced, HR 8355, a bill introduced in Congress, the Accountable Produce Medicine Act, and instrumental in ensuring that that language in the bill includes language around local sourcing and regenerative agriculture. For our listeners who aren't as familiar, can you walk through what this would actually do and what those provisions mean and why they're so important?
Absolutely. And I want to, I've said a lot that this is the first federal bill and the first ever food as medicine bill that even mentions regenerative, but that's actually not technically correct. Dr. Chen worked with Congresswoman Barbara Lee on creating really a federal bill that prioritizes and really spelled it out way better than I think this bill did. Um, but this is the first one I think that's been officially entered into legislation, and this is really critical. And of course, it's not perfect. I wanted way more specifications in there about this. But one of the things we wanted to do is really, food as medicine is not being covered as a federal benefit. There are large pilots that are happening. There's lots of states that are doing this or working on doing this. There's large pilots in in Veterans Affairs and Indian Health Services, soon to be with maternal health. And these programs are working, and they're cost savings and they're working. And this would actually direct the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation to do really a federal demonstration to potentially roll it into all of federal healthcare policy as a reimbursable bundled payment. And so that would include food, education, and patient monitoring, because we believe that having quality programs include not just food, but also education for long-term behavioral change and creating some type of priority for local sourcing and regenerative sourcing. Because if we don't include that, just like Stephen was talking about and I was talking about, that'll just get completely missed. We'll just default to the status quo, and we won't be prioritizing those growers. So I think it's really critical. I am at least glad that local was defined within 250 miles. I'd love it to be like more like hyper local than local regional, as Stephen was saying as well. But the USDA defines local as 400 miles, which to me is not local. And so
Hmm.
I feel like that's a win. The regenerative ag language has already been changed, which I'm not crazy about. But the fact that it's being mentioned and that there is a priority there, that needs to be protected. I think it's critical. I think it would be landmark legislation to have this included, and that people, farmers and environmentalists and other people who understand the need for this will be felt seen and also be able to get involved.
It really is exciting, and Roots of Change is pleased to support this federal legislation, and we'll have more resources on that on our website that our listeners can check out. Stephen, for someone like you who's worked on leadership both at the federal level, as Erin mentioned, with former Congressman but now Mayor of Oakland, Barbara Lee, how do how would this influence and impact your work?
Yeah, I mean, all bills build on each other, right? And so this is a really important iteration and naming of this local, of where the food comes from. I mean, that's what Erin worked so hard on. And I worked on it similarly in the National Food as Medicine bill that Barbara Lee put forth. I think it was HR 9631 at the end of her term, right? Both of them and those that are going to come, if we can continue to name what people often take out. You know, Matthew, you're a policy person. We've pushed in California state to include local, to include these things, but then somehow they get taken out, right? When it finally goes through. So there's some backdoor, something happening, right? That is critical. Like we have to name the directional approach with some specifications. And yes, it's messy. Regenerative is not fully defined, understood, but it continues to be refined. And so it will be a critical piece to move this work forward to have CMMI recognize the sourcing piece that Erin has put language in on, right? That is critical. And then to really move towards this idea of a covered benefit, making this just part of healthcare. All of these efforts have been trying to do that. I think that, you know, as other bills come out and build on this bill and the work that, say, your white paper calls out, which is what we called out in the Barbara Lee bill, which was to say, if we want to integrate healthcare with ag and food systems, we have to start doing the parts to build those infrastructure pieces and then connecting them. So I know that there needs to be an organization of the USDA work to create the supply chain, the missing middle, the growers side, incentivize that, and to grow that at quote scale over time, because healthcare is not going to do that. That's not healthcare's lane. But healthcare can demand a supply that's this way and create its own systems, training the clinicians, building the infrastructure into the electronic health record, all of the stuff to operationalize and say, okay, we're ready to partner with the food and ag systems as long as they're ready to grow the food, right? That's what I think all bills will need to do. How do we bring ag health together? And I sit in county government, right? And I'll give you an example of siloing. I'm in Alameda County Health. When people think food, the first reaction, is to say, oh, that's not our domain. That's social services. And I'm saying, actually, no. Food is fundamental to health. We need to actually own and step into our work around health by looking at food, right? So the bill is going to be really important because it's in the CMS, in the CMMI place, and saying we're going to innovate in that space. And we have to continue to build the supply chain that's oriented in a way that is localized, regional, and can connect into healthcare, all the food hubs. And it needs to be beyond emergency response. We have an amazing emergency response system with incredible food banks all over the nation doing awesome work. And some of them are leaning into this food system work. Some of them may be more traditional. Hey, we're ready to serve when there's an emergency. We need to move beyond a reliance only on an emergency system to actually investing in the fundamental supply chain infrastructure, the missing middle, as you were saying, Coco, with our farmers directly and our food hubs and our aggregators, not broadline distributors as the default, but how do we build these up within local communities so that we can withstand the various threats that come?
I mean, and even leveraging, right? You have emergency response and these people who are ready to activate, but making sure that there is investment and preparedness across the board, that your day-to-day, call it your stable era, right, is focusing on those relationships as well will only make times of disruption and or emergency flow better. You will have those like networks and collaborations that are better kept, better really resourced as well, and what an opportunity that would be overall. I
Can
wanted
I
to point, yeah, go ahead.
can I just give one discrete example of what we're of that of tying kind of building off of infrastructure to respond to an emergency?
Please. Hmm.
So we've been building Recipe for Health, our whole infrastructure of doorstep delivery of local, hyperlocal, regenerative organic produce to our patients that we prescribe food as medicine to, right? We have this infrastructure. We are faced with an emergency where food insecurity is going up, increasing up off the roofs, and people are afraid because of immigration, ICE, to go out. So our public health teams and our whole county have realized we have this resource in Recipe for Health. We're going to now tie potentially 63 different public health facing programs to elderly adults, to children, to identify those patients who are food insecure, who are at risk and vulnerable for immigration issues, to tie that into our infrastructure that we have built over the years so that we can provide discrete doorstep delivery.
Mm,
This is now taking Recipe for Health, which has been much more healthcare focused on health centers, to now a broader community-based response to meet this moment where people are in fear, as well as
mhm.
rising food insecurity. That is a perfect example of integration and investment of how to do it so that we can face immediate shocks that your paper has called out, but also the slow burn.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that day to
Hmm.
day. Within that piece, Matthew, you developed a model policy language component to this white paper. Can you speak to some of the ways that that might be able to be used by different people?
Yeah, thanks, Coco. I mean, and it speaks to what Stephen was just referencing. When we were developing the white paper, we saw the need to put tools in the hands of leaders, policy leaders, community advocates, whether they're working at the very local level or even at the state, so that they could. There were two pieces. First was more of a resolution or a declaration, so that a municipality could state their intent that when developing programs, policies, responses to these issues, that it was their intent to be building the infrastructure that you just discussed, making sure that there was priority to ensure that resources were provided to build that infrastructure to support local and regional food systems and also those community-based networks. And then secondly was actually when those projects are funded. So often as an afterthought was, okay, well, how are we building in preference to what, for example, Erin has done at the federal level with the new legislation? How are we doing that at the local level when grant funding starts to flow so that those funds do go into the infrastructure and the support that's needed? And so the model policy in the white paper is intended to be evergreen language that could be developed over time. It could be adapted to the local needs and circumstances of a city, a county, or a community, to put those policy tools directly into the hands as they're developing a food as medicine initiative or a grant program that's addressing another aspect of the food system.
Just hoping to build all those pieces together. Absolutely. Erin, I want to go back to something you mentioned. You mentioned these kind of more isolated pilots or even just pilot programs that are going on within the field right now. Do you have any examples that you think of pilot programs and or regional experiments that are ready to scale or replicate nationally? And any lessons that we should take from them and apply to others?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, back to how Stephen was defining scale, and I think that programs like Recipe for Health and like FreshRx are definitely scalable. One approach that we have taken recently that has worked really beautifully is one thing that's really important to this work is trust in the community. And community-based organizations have that trust, particularly ones that are doing it well, right, and doing it right. And what we have done is we have had to work really hard to position ourselves to be able to integrate with healthcare as a community-based organization, HIPAA security and all that fun stuff. And, not every community-based organization is going to want to do that or have the
Yeah.
ability or the capacity to do that. And so what we've taken in an example when we created a Spanish program, we worked in collaboration with a community-based organization on the east side of Tulsa that is deeply intertwined with the Spanish community. And we basically created the training and infrastructure and extended that to them so that they can do what they already do best. And actually, they out enrolled our team when they first started in the time frame that they had just started with us, and it's worked really well. And we see that as a really beautiful way to replicate. And you sort of see models with that with some of these social care networks, but there's also inherent problems with those social care networks as well, like taking too much margin off the top and kind of squeezing the community-based organizations. And that's not the approach we want to take. We want to make sure things are kept in the communities and that we can fill gaps in different communities that maybe there's not, a prominent community-based organization. I think that that's a really, for us, a great way that we could scale with integrity, with trust in communities, without coming in as an outsider and telling communities what they should do, and that things can be very customizable. And so I think that I think that we've got to have standards for good models, and they
Yeah.
need to include food education, priority on sourcing, and we need to be able to prove outcomes. But when you're doing it like this and you're sourcing really well and you have great education, like getting outcomes is, kind of inevitable. And so, yeah, I think that there's further infrastructure challenges where we need to really, integrate even more with clinics and health systems. It'd be, Dr. Chen could speak to, like, they have brilliant infrastructure they've created for bidirectional feedback with physicians, et cetera, et cetera. Those are things that need to keep happening for programs that are holistic and intentional to scale.
Hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think just like pulling on that on kind of the themes of some of the pieces that we've discussed today, collaboration keeps coming up. I mean, I think what you described with the Latino community down in Tulsa or Spanish communities is really looking at that level of collaboration as well, and sharing those resources and inspiring others to take some of the models and apply them to their context. I think that's fantastic. So I wanted to end on this note of really looking at, I guess, for those the listeners interested in becoming more involved with healthy food access and food as medicine and who are pushing for that, what type of collaboration or support would you each call for? Stephen, I'm going to start with you.
What type of collaboration or support would I call for to move the needle forward on
Absolutely. Yes,
regenerative
precisely.
Buddhist medicine model? I would say that one thing that I remember from one of my colleagues is this quote: system level changes need system level funding.
Hmm.
So we can have all the collaboration in the world, and we will do that, like mutual aid, working in community, all of that's going to always happen. But boy, that could be super amplified, super catalyzed if system level funders came in. Now, what are those system level funders? Certainly philanthropy for some is important, especially to bridge, work that's happening on the ground with policy change that will usually take a longer time to happen. But certainly healthcare is one place where we're using dollars to help transform. Will that continue given this moment? We hope so, but it's challenging when you disinvest from Medicaid, right? So that makes it hard. So I think regardless of the trust that one needs to build in community, we also need funding that is abundant, because when there's not that funding, then trust breaks down too, because everyone's trying to figure out how to survive,
Hmm.
and like it doesn't create the openness necessarily to work always together, because you're barely making it, right? It's like the leftovers. I would say that that's a key piece. I would also say a key piece is, and Erin touched on it, and we're doing it, the idea of and your white paper called for it, some type of intermediary, a hub that can manage and support some of the things that are needed for integration into healthcare or
Yeah.
integration into food. Someone needs to be holding that, and it shouldn't be the farmer. It shouldn't be the health center. A third party that is close to the ground to them and has trust, like Erin said, and works with them, not in an extractive way, but in a servant leadership way. How do you
Hmm.
actually be of service to be a facilitator so that this can grow? I think that's a second quality of what would be needed in this era of collaboration.
Yeah.
And just one more thing to add is getting local food systems ready for scale.
Yeah.
And we have a great partner, Think Regeneration, in this region that really saw the potential from our program. And they have worked diligently to create and work towards building more of that readiness for the local food system. And obviously, like even in California, right, Matthew, you were mentioning there that surprisingly, where most of the produce of the nation is grown, you all weren't really ready to distribute all of that. And of course, it's even worse here. So that is important partnership. But I think that people working in that space need to understand where farmers are and not add extra bureaucratic burden to farmers. And I think there's a fine line there. And I think it's very hard to understand that if you're not a farmer or haven't spent a bunch of time with farmers. So just to call that out, and for those folks doing that work on the ground to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the three of you really for your time and your efforts that you're doing within Food as Medicine and the initiatives that you're leading and the fantastic programs. I mean, we touched on scalability and the importance of that, how regenerative agriculture has to be part of the conversation. And I really just thank you for bringing those things to light and to continuing to have those conversations and impacting others to do the same.
Thank you for having us on. It's fun to share the stage together with Erin and Matthew and you.
Thank you all so much.